Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. So about a month ago, on a golden early summer evening, I found myself just outside Exeter, New Hampshire, sitting in a meadow, along with about 60 or 70 other folks who had all ventured to an intimate performance space called the Word Barn. What drew all of these folks, of varying ages and backgrounds, out on a Thursday evening? Why, a live presentation of a podcast, of course. You see, that's just the kind of impact and fan loyalty that the Seacoast Stories podcast has made in coastal New England in just over a year. Joining me on this episode is Troy Farkas, the creator, producer, and host of Seacoast Stories, which features compelling stories about the unique people, businesses, and newsmakers of New Hampshire and southern Maine. This weekly podcast takes on sometimes controversial issues, highlights local businesses, tells entertaining stories, and seeks to uncover what makes the northern New England Seacoast such a hidden gem. Prior to creating Seacoast Stories, Troy Farkas spent 7 years producing top-performing podcasts at ESPN and the Ringer podcast network on Spotify, which were hosted by some of the most high-profile sports media personalities in the world. Troy spoke to me from, as expected, his home on the New Hampshire Seacoast. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum, from providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs. Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do like, share, follow, or leave a review. Now on to my conversation with Troy Farkas. Troy Farkas, welcome to Making Media Now.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. Honored to be here.
It's great to be speaking with you. So to bring listeners up to speed, I'm trying to remember, it was probably about 3 or 4 months ago when I came across this very cool podcast called Seacoast Stories. And just to provide some geographic context, this podcast, Making Media Now, originates from a small seacoast town on the coast of New England, on the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border, and it is just a wonderful gem of a place geographically, but it's also this wonderful kind of bouillabaisse, I would say, of people and cultures and stories. And so when I came across your podcast, I thought this is definitely something I need to check out. But before we dive into, pun intended, the Seacoast Stories, I want to hear a little bit about the Troy Farkas story.
Ah, yes.
Where are you from? What are you all about? How did you get into this field of audio storytelling? And what led you to the Seacoast that we're both situated in right now, and the follow-on sort of enchantment with it?
First of all, you brought something up that super fascinating to me. In all of my interviews that I've done with people on the Seacoast and just out and about talking to people, there seems to be no clear definition of what the Seacoast is. So the fact that you said Newburyport is a part of the Seacoast is controversial and does not align.
We're into the controversy already.
Does not align with a lot of the opinions of people. I've had it is wide ranging. People are like, Rhode Island is the Seacoast. And I'm like, I don't think so. My personal Seacoast definition, you didn't ask, is Newburyport to Ogunquit. That's the Seacoast, but you'll get a bunch of different answers.
I don't think that our grasp on shareable truths has devolved to the point where we now get to debate geography. Do we? Do we get to do that? If there's a coast, and when you step off that coast, you're in the ocean, you're on the Seacoast.
No, the Seacoast seems to be subjective. I dare you to go around asking people what the definition is. But semantics aside,
let me just stop you there for a sec. That is actually such a telling regional characteristic where people get very indignant about Wait a minute. What are you talking about, Seacoast? First of all, I know that I am committing the grievous sin of actually speaking to you from Massachusetts, which tends to be sort of the Darth Vader of New England when you talk to people in New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont. Sometimes, we're the hulking monolith of Massachusetts that just want to tax you to death and whatnot.
Yes,
but
of course.
It's funny that you say that, because when I think about the specialness of the Seacoast area that we're both in, I think of, I'm sure you're familiar geographically with Cape Ann. So you're all the way down to like Rockport, Mass. And then, yeah, sure, I'd go up to as far north as Portland. And again, geographically speaking, we're all on the same coast. But yeah. Your podcast and these stories that come from your podcast are so much more than just about geography. So Let's get back to my original question, the Troy Farkas story. Where did it begin, and how did we get where we are?
Yeah, so I come from a family of media people, newspaper editors, writers. My brother is 6 years older than me, and he's a radio personality. And me being a contrarian by nature, I didn't want to get into the family business of media. So what did I do? I studied U.S. history. Not that I planned on doing anything with it, but I'm a history nut, and my real dream is to win on Jeopardy one day. So I went to school in upstate New York. I'm from upstate New York, in the Albany, Saratoga area. Went to the University at Albany, studied U.S. history, got in and out in 3 years. Now, even though I didn't care too much about learning the media stuff in the classroom, my entire childhood really was my media education. I always say that we had dinner table conversations about punctuation and sentence structure. And so that stuff is in my blood. I didn't necessarily need to learn it in school. Journalism, media is stuff that you really can't understand until you do it. So I spent my college years just getting very hands-on at a school that was not a media school at all, not your Northwesterns, not your Syracuse or Missouris with like these big programs where you're competing with a lot. I essentially got to go do student radio, TV, newspaper from the jump, own all of that, lead all of those departments, and just get the reps, make the mistakes of not hitting record and losing your files and such. That is a rite of passage in this business. And then I got some really good internships in college at the ESPN radio affiliate in Albany, at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, and some local TV stations as well. So I parlayed all of that experience into my first job out of school, which was at ESPN National, located for some reason in Bristol, Connecticut, in Farmtown, USA. So I started there as a radio production assistant. Low man on the totem pole. I'm working nights, weekends, overnights for 2 years or so. Absolutely hated my life. I mean, miserable existence. The job itself was so-so. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing, but I understand you don't start where you want to be. So
are you a sports guy?
Yeah, I grew up in very much a sports family. I was a big athlete myself, so very much a part of my identity growing up. And so ESPN was a dream come true in terms of the things I was experiencing every day, the people I was coming across. Here's Nick Saban, like the coach of University of Alabama, who was just winning national championship after national championship. And I'm getting him mic'd up, just having these crazy experiences every day. That 8-year-old Troy is like, what the heck has your life become? But all that said, I was empty inside because I was so overworked, so underslept, and again, not really doing the things that I wanted to be doing. Now, this is 2018, 19 time. Podcasting is definitely a thing then, but it's really about to take off. And so then me kind of seeing where everything is going, also wanting to get out of my miserable existence, I sweet talked my way within the politics of ESPN to be able to move over into our growing podcast department, made that happen. And then my life immediately flipped overnight to where I was working on some of the biggest shows in the world, hosted by some of the most popular sports media journalists and content creators in the world, getting a front row seat to what it is to be professional, to tell stories, to interview, how to conduct yourself, Meanwhile, like I'm coaching them how to podcast, and they're coaching me about how to be a professional in the media. So I really got to work with the best of the best in the industry. And I've parlayed so many of those teachings into what I'm doing now. Now, COVID kind of changed a bunch of things at ESPN. Live sports not happening, gonna take a hit to the bottom line. So I didn't leave ESPN, but there were things that were happening behind the scenes that I didn't like. So I was like, this isn't the place for me anymore. So at the beginning of 2021, I left ESPN, went freelance for a few months, started traveling the world in all these cool places, checking off these bucket list items. And then
to tell me about some of those cool places.
Yeah. So I had really good friends in Boston, cool place, Boston. So I moved to Boston for a little bit. Then I moved to Denver. There's something about Northeasterners. So many Northeasterners go out to Colorado or California. It's like this, like because we grow up mountains and lakes and skiing and hiking and whatnot. And so over there, all that's just 10X. And
you
so
went west, young man.
Yeah, there's some type of elusiveness to it, like a rite of passage. All Northeasterners have to go on some type of spiritual find myself kind of journey. You did that too?
I did that too.
Yeah, exactly. We all do it at some point. So I went out to Denver for a bit, and to Portland, Oregon, and to Phoenix area, Orange County, California area, and just started doing a bunch of cool things while taking advantage of the ability to work remotely, which I hadn't been able to prior. And then at the end of my time at ESPN, I had gotten really into producing combat sports podcasts. So I left the traditional sports of NBA and MLB and NFL to go work on boxing and the UFC, which was like blowing up at this time as well. And so again, kind of countercultural. I like doing the weird thing. I'm like, let me go do the thing that no other media person wants to cover. Let me cover people beating each other up. And so I immediately became like the guy for UFC podcasting in the industry. And so I got some freelance clients working with UFC champions. And then when Spotify at the end of 21 was making a push into combat sports coverage, they hired me. And then I started working on our fighting content.
And that's the genre name. I had never heard that. Combat sports.
Combat sports is boxing, mixed martial arts, wrestling, things, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff. That's combat sports. The UFC is similar, like the NFL is the National Football League. Football is the sport. The UFC is the league. MMA is the sport.
Yep, got it.
Yes. And so I started working on all that stuff. And then 3.5 years go by working on a lot of that stuff. And then some of the other like traditional sports stuff as well at Spotify. Again, big shows, big, massive international audiences. And then I moved to the Seacoast 2 years ago, totally randomly. I had gotten tired of traveling the world. I would then go on to live in London and in Hawaii. And I just kind of got tired of it, because when you're 1 foot in, 1 foot out everywhere you go, it's really hard to lead like a meaningful life with rich relationships and such. And so I was ready to come back home.
If you and I had been having this conversation during this kind of peripatetic phase of your young life, which remains young, and I said, Troy, what's behind all these moves? What would you have said?
When I studied abroad in Scotland in 2016, my junior year, that was a transformational moment for me, because I know that's so cliche to say when people starting about their study abroad, but I grew up, again, in upstate New York in a very sheltered family. I wasn't allowed to walk to Cumberland Farms after school with my friends. I wasn't allowed to go to the YMCA without parental supervision. We didn't travel. We went to Cape Cod for one summer vacation every year for 15 years straight, and it still grinds my gears to this day. Becoming a history student and opening my textbooks and seeing the Eiffel Tower and the Berlin Wall. I'm like, oh my God, there's a whole other world out there that exists beyond upstate New York, and I wasn't allowed to go see it. And so behind my parents' backs, I finagled a study abroad trip to Scotland. And then my entire worldview opened up. And then when I returned from that trip after bouncing around all of Europe, doing all these cool things that had been brought to life from my textbooks, I vowed then that the rest of my life I would spend just like trying to do and see as much as possible, because life is so short. Right. And so to answer your question, I think that's what was driving that wanderlust and that curiosity for living all these different lives, getting all these different perspectives to then, see how the other half lives so that you can form a better worldview and become a better human being.
In doing that, what observations did you make in maybe what I think conclusions is probably too strong a word, but what hypotheses perhaps did you draw around what constitutes a regional character? Like what differentiates the people that you met in Denver versus the people that you met in Orange County? And I don't necessarily mean as people, but I mean as residents of a particular area. Is it geography? Is it the climate? Is it the sort of the cultural ethos or values that you engage with?
Yeah, I would say it's the last part. What I've noticed here, as opposed to what I noticed in all those other places, in all those other places, a lot of transplants. Denver is full of transplants. California is full of transplants. Here in this area, and really on the Seacoast specifically, like, yes, there are more transplants coming now in the post-COVID years, but it's still very there's a lot of people who have been here forever and have been through all the changes. I very much have always been a support local person. I have always been obsessed with entrepreneurship stories because you have to be a certain kind of human to go do your own thing and to not have the stability of corporate life and whatnot. And because there's so many people who just mediocre is not the right word, but there's so many people who work corporate jobs, hate their lives, live for the weekends, and that just never appealed to me. And so the people who buck that trend and deviate from the norm are my kind of people, and I've always been fascinated by, and that's why I love having conversations with those kinds of people. And so I noticed in my travels that that ride or die, support local, entrepreneurial vibe is what's really special about this place. People show up for other people in ways that I did not observe in all the other places I lived. Now, granted, I will say that with the caveat of, like I said, I was living 1 foot in, 1 foot out all the time. So I don't think it's totally fair for me to say Denver doesn't have that vibe when I was living there, not trying to really establish myself there. Maybe I was just looking in the wrong places.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, whether this was conscious on your part or not, I don't know. But, your study of history and then, eventually you landing on the New England Seacoast and creating this podcast where you're telling these Seacoast stories, as your history will tell you, the original settlers, the settlers, not the indigenous population, the original settlers of New England were of that mindset. Now, some of it was because of religious persecution. Others, it was because they had that drive within their spirit to break out on their own, away from tradition, away from norms, and, be those risk takers. So it's an interesting character trait. And, whether you can project that onto a particular region or not, I think that probably comes down to an individual basis. But sometimes you are in a place where, without ever maybe even agreeing upon it en masse, when you start to talk to people, you realize, there's something about the call of this type of an environment that recognizes your type of person, welcomes your type of person, and needs your type of person. Now, that's not a guarantee of success of whatever endeavor you're entering into. But I want to go back to your biography for just a bit too. I know that you spent a good deal of time at the Ringer podcast network, which is kind of a behemoth, and so I want to hear a little bit about that. And I know you've recently wound down there, so let's chat that up.
Yes, for clarity for your listeners who don't know, I use The Ringer and Spotify interchangeably. Spotify acquired The Ringer podcast network in 2020 or 2021. I usually just say Spotify, assuming that non-sports fans don't know what The Ringer is. So I was brought there in 2021 working on all these combat sports podcasts. Ariel Helwani, Peter Rosenberg, these are big names in the combat sports and the media fields. And so I was working, behind the scenes, making, audio podcasts, video podcasts, cutting clips for social media and whatnot. All the stuff I had, really gotten in my toolbox from my time at ESPN. And it was really fun being there because Spotify in 2020, part of the acquisition of The Ringer, of signing Joe Rogan's podcast to an exclusive Spotify deal, Alex Cooper's called her daddy to an exclusive deal with the Obamas. Spotify signed a deal. And so here I am at Spotify, who's going all in on podcasting, taking it away from Apple, which invented the podcast. And Apple just kind of like let Spotify have it. They were like, all right, you can have the podcast business. Like, we've got, other things to focus on. Go take it. And so Spotify did. Spotify quickly, once they started putting in some effort, became the podcast place for creators and for consumers. They overtook Apple pretty quickly. So here I am, at the world's leading podcast distributor, who's also making their own content, of which I'm responsible for. And I'm all in on all the internal discussion boards about the things that we're doing. So it was just such a masterclass for me in staying on top of the industry and where it's going and being on top of the trends and getting, Spotify's quarterly earnings calls and seeing what went right, what went wrong. Spotify is such part of their culture, is innovation. They move so quickly, which at so many big corporate companies, they move so slowly and it's so annoying. I would argue sometimes Spotify moved too quickly for its own good, didn't actually let things gel. But overall, I really enjoyed my time there, and The Ringer, again, kind of operates independently from Spotify, just uses a lot of Spotify resources, super chill, super laid back. We made they make sports podcasts, pop culture podcasts, really big in the movie stuff, like the rewatchables, the big picture, big podcasts. And so I, at some point, got to touch all of these shows at The Ringer, which we really became the very profitable arm of Spotify podcasting wise. Obviously, it's well documented how things went south with the Obamas and with Meghan Markle, who we also had signed a deal with as well. The Ringer was the place to be in podcasting for Spotify. And so I was grateful I got to be there for 3.5 years. Just a few weeks ago at the time we're talking, The Ringer and I did part ways, and that's a fancy way of saying that I got laid off. Mm-hmm. However, I felt relief after that happened. I had been wanting to leave I'd been thinking about leaving for about a year. Yep. I just outgrown the role, had outgrown my time there, and that phase of my life in terms of making stuff for other people. I launched Seacoast Stories in June of 2024. It took off pretty quickly, and it gave me all of those things that I wasn't getting. It gave me so much in real life community and connection. I had grown tired the previous few years of, I was making podcasts heard around the world with big numbers of people listening. I get the occasional DM, you're great, this is awesome. But I also got 10 other DMs saying, you're ugly, your voice sucks, I hate you, go die. You get tired of all of that after a while. I'm tired of making all this stuff for people that I'm never going to meet. Sure. And so with Seacoast Stories, I'm getting stopped left and right around town. I love your podcast. I love what you're doing for the community. There's collaborations happening. There's all this support local that I spoke about. It's people are supporting me and I'm supporting them. And it's just this circular thing that I love so much. And so over the past year, I just been thinking, I want to do this. All the signs are pointing me toward this way. I know it's an uphill battle, but I know I can do it. I need everything to be right. I need the timing to be right. I need to have the model figured out of how this is going to work. But as the universe does, which I know is looking out for me, gave me the kick in the butt that I needed to go pursue it full time. So most people feel panic when they get a layoff call. I felt relief.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of energy that's propel you into the next thing, which would be probably the expansion of this thing, the Seacoast Stories that we're talking about. From a production standpoint, and as someone who is a storyteller, what did you, between your radio experience in college and then your years of podcast producing and storytelling, did you make any observations around what type of connection with listeners that you can make really through artful production of audio? And I'm speaking about audio as a differentiator from video also, because obviously in a video realm, you're going to allow the pictures to tell a lot of the story. But in audio, that's not the option.
Yeah, I don't watch anything. I don't watch TV. I don't watch YouTube. I don't watch documentaries. I don't doom scroll on social. I'm such a listener, and that's why I love podcasts so much, and why, as an audio diehard, I die inside every time I produce a video podcast for somebody. And all the articles, all the industry talk, video podcast. I'm just like, yes, I get it, and I certainly understand why it's important, but we cannot lose what makes audio so special. We've been storytelling since the day we started walking this earth, audio-wise, and it has always taken different forms. There's a reason radio hasn't died. It's a terrible model, business model, but it still works. And with podcasting, there's just something so intimate about that relationship between host and listener. Most of the time, you're wearing headphones. It is being piped directly into your ears. It is seeping into your brain. Someone's voice is penetrating the walls of your ears, and it just becomes so special and provides a relationship, this kind of like, I know you, you know me relationship that just does not get formed from me consuming a YouTube video of yours. So that's why it is so important to me to have really good audio quality. So this is where all my engineering skills that I've gained, I will do whatever it takes to get really good audio quality. So that's why for Seacoast Stories, and I have the luxury of being able to do this because everyone is geographically close, I do everything in person, where I give you my microphones, I control the environment so that I can make this sound really good, where I'm not doing it over Zoom and I'm trusting you to have a good setup that I ultimately have no control over. I control the situation so I can make a really good audio product. And then and
I will note that the conversation you and I are having right now is over Zoom.
Yes. And it's not me not having good quality, I'm sure.
Well, but I will say, I find as a podcast listener, there is something different. I can tell, not just from the audio quality, but I can tell often just the flow of the conversation, whether the people are in the same room or not. Yeah. Because you and I are over Zoom right now, we can see each other. So to a degree, we're picking up on each other's, nonverbal cues, right?
Yes.
But that only approximates, and it's sort of a distant approximation of if we were in the same room, if we were sitting at the same sofa and so forth. So I commend your choice to have your Seacoast Story podcast in person with in the same room as the person you're chatting.
Yeah, I'm so bullish on in real life everything, but also for podcasting. I'm a new yoga teacher as well, so I'm very into the whole spiritual world, and I very much believe in energy. And there's an energy, Michael, right now that is being disrupted by this conversation happening online. If we were sitting next to each other, there would be some type of energy exchange, some pheromone exchange that would make this even more meaningful. All that's to say, I'm enjoying this very much right now, but in real life, it's always different.
Noted, and I agree. So how long had you been settled on the New Hampshire Seacoast before you started to think they're both, the wonderful part about your podcast is that, yes, these stories are unique, but the most powerful ones are universal.
Exactly.
So whether you're talking to entrepreneurs or, whether you're talking about talking with people who had life-altering experiences happen to take place on the Seacoast, you're checking both of those boxes, the universality and sort of the unique Seacoast enabled, perhaps, or Seacoast
Yes.
inspired stories. So when did the idea start to come to you to say, there are these stories to tell, and I believe that there's an audience that wants to hear them?
And I'm so glad that you picked up on that, because that is very intentional on my part. In the conversations that I have, I try to, like, yes, they are personal stories of the people I'm talking to, but I'm trying to tweeze out the universal experiences, the things that we all can relate to. So that theoretically, I've been thinking about this, like, I should just try to market this podcast to New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts people. But really, like, the owner of the coffee shop in Rye, New Hampshire, his story, the things that he's saying, like, really can translate to any human being. So that's something I'm going to be thinking about moving forward.
Well, just to put a pin in that one for 1 second, and you talked about it earlier too. Around there was something within you that no judgment involved, but you knew that sort of a 9-to-5 corporate job was just not your thing.
Yeah.
Right. And when you're talking to entrepreneurs, you're talking to people that, whether they recognize it or not, there is something within them that is driven to fuse the uniqueness of who they believe they are with gifts that they believe they have been imparted with, and they're going to combine those to make a living in this world.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps for someone who says, you know what, tell me where my office is, show me where my desk is, tell me what's due on Wednesday and on Friday. And again, no judgment in that. Certainly the world needs those folks. But it is a very different, it's a different mindset. And there are people who, you talk to people perhaps of a certain generation or maybe of a particular mindset, and they say, what are you, crazy? Work isn't supposed to be about you realizing your personal potential or you being fulfilled. You do the job, you get the check, and you go on with your life. Yeah. But if that drive is truly within you and you never at least attempt to tap into it, then you will forever go through your life asking the question, what if?
Yes, and that is something I never want to ask. So I'm all about going for it. And yeah, this generation, I'm 29, we are all about personal fulfillment and self-actualization through our careers. Like, there's an intertwining of purpose and your career, whereas maybe in past generations, whenever I complained to my parents about me not liking a job, it's like, suck it up, kid. Work is work. I'm sick of that. To answer your question, so I moved here in June of 2023, very randomly. Again, countercultural. I have a bunch of best friends in Boston, so I wanted to maybe move to Boston. But then I was like, I've been there, done that. I know what that's like. What's something weird, nearish to Boston? Google tells me, New Hampshire. Never really given much thought to that state. What's going on there? And then I stumble upon Portsmouth. Oh, this is cool. And then, it's only an hour from Boston. Sweet. So I moved here in June of 2023. And similar to all those other places that I lived, kind of came here 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Noticed the specialty of the place, but had already found myself dreaming of maybe going back to London, or I had friends in Miami. I'd never done the New York City thing, despite growing up 3 hours from the city. Had always seen that as an inevitable truth, being both a New York Stater and a media guy, that I would end up there at some point. So I was dreaming of all of those things.
Heard that if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
That's what they say. And, didn't want to, not that I really wanted to move to New York City, but it just kind of felt like a what if kind of deal. Right. And so the girl I was dating, she dumps me on top of a parking garage a couple months after being in Portsmouth. Then I got randomly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 27. And so I took those as signs as like, this ain't working. I need to go on to the next thing. This place is cursed. But then something special happened. December 2023, I'd already been set to move. I was going to go back to upstate New York for a little bit and then move to New York City. I had broken my lease in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And the yoga studio I'd been going to, Three Bridges Yoga in downtown, I had a couple conversations with the owner, Stephanie, had told her about diabetes. I was very, very new to it and how to handle it. Like that's a whole full-time job in and of itself. And so when you exercise, you can have complications. So I had told her like, hey, I might have some type of medical emergency during your class at some point, just so you know. So that emergency happens one Sunday morning yoga class at Three Bridges. I have a blood sugar crash. I'm sweating profusely. I'm freaking out. I wear this continuous glucose monitor on my arm, which is connected to my phone, which goes off with this shrieking, piercing alarm whenever I'm in medical danger. In yoga class, this alarm goes off. This environment, which is so zen and peaceful and quiet and calm. There's 60 people in this class. My phone is on the other side of the room. It starts going off. I'm embarrassed. Not only am I dying, but I'm also embarrassed.
Worse.
Yeah, I have to tiptoe around all of these people who think I'm the asshole who brought his phone to class, breaking the cardinal rule. They don't know what's going on. And so I get my phone, I turn the thing off. Stephanie, who was at the front of the class, she comes over to me and looks me in the eye and says, "Are you okay? Can I get you anything? What do you need? I am here for you." Now, again, nothing. Most good people would do something like that as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not some huge noble act that she did. But in that exact moment, after traveling for years, not feeling like I belonged anywhere, after getting this disease and now grappling with an entire new identity, to have someone care about me in that way and to show me that I had made some type of impact on them in the previous few months, that they would feel compelled to do that for me, it just made me feel special.
Yeah, you were seen as an individual. And in that
exactly.
moment, you were an individual with pretty unique needs.
Yes. Now, me being a stubborn man, I don't need your help. I'm fine. I get the heck out of there and fix myself. An hour later, I open up my computer and subject line from Stephanie, "Are you okay?" An hour later after the class. That meant even more to me. And then a very similar episode played out at my gym a few days later. It was at that point that I realized, okay, wait, maybe I actually have made some type of impact on people. And maybe these are signs that people do care about me here and that I should give this more of a chance, that I shouldn't tap into this avoidant attachment style thing I have, and that I should do the hard work of staying in one place.
Yeah.
And so
and who knows? Maybe it also triggered something in you that said, you recognized in yourself the opportunity and the ability to maybe be a conduit to tell those stories and taken as individual stories. They seem kind of, whatever, right? But taken, for instance, the Stephanie, as also an entrepreneur, she could have been looking at you, and when she saw you have an issue or go down, her first thought could have been, "Oh, damn, there's a customer that's not going to be coming back because he's got a health issue." She didn't think that way. No. She knew that she knew that reaching out and making a connection with you as a human being was going to have, if you want to get all gross and opportunistic about it, far longer ROI than just, thinking about, oh gosh, I'm going to be down one participant in my yoga classes from now on.
Yeah. And I would say, so I took that experience and realized, all right, you know what? I'm going to see if my apartment complex will take me back. And so they did. And then a couple months later, I had been hosting my own podcast on the side for years as well, outside of ESPN, outside of The Ringer. And so I hosted this self-improvement, personal development podcast that maybe 75 people on average listen to. And I had always wanted to do a live podcast. I had produced a bunch for other people, but I'd always wanted to do my own. I grew up performing on stages. As an athlete, I was in opera, I was in musical theater, I was into all of that stuff. And so I wanted to get back to performing. I had spent so many years repressing that stuff, working behind the scenes, that I had forgotten how much I loved being on stage. And so I was like, I'm going to throw a live podcast. no one here listens to this thing. No one knows who I am, but I'm going to do it. And I'm going to host it in downtown Portsmouth at a cool venue. And so in March 2023, on a rainy Monday, I hosted this show and 75 people came. I had 75 listeners to this podcast around the world, and 75 local people came. Now, they didn't come to see me. They came to see the three guests that I had interviewed, including Stephanie, who all had kind of their own local followings. But that night was such a success. People loved it so much. That was when the light bulb went off in my head, where I was like, wait, there seems to be some type of something here about people showing up for one another. And as I took a look around at the local media landscape, this is not to disparage any local media. I know how understaffed they are and how little resources they have, and they're just trying to like get the news out. Mm-hmm. They have that covered, but what they were missing is really those features, those long articles, those lengthier packages on TV. Just about like, who are you? Right. Those universal truths. There was none of that happening, and so I was like, I'm committing to moving here. I want to go all in on this area. I have all of this skill set of video and audio and storytelling that I've accrued through the years. Let me throw all of that into a local podcast. Lo and behold, Seacoast Stories started 2 or 3 months later, and it's been so much better and has given me so much more than I ever anticipated it would have.
So it's interesting when I was listening to and running through the list of the guests that you've had over your first year plus. Yes, there's certainly a healthy representation of entrepreneurs, mm-hmm. and those are kind of, I would say, a hybrid of almost like entrepreneurial case studies and personal actualization, where people are saying, I felt the drive, I couldn't say no, I knew what I was putting at risk, but I had to do it anyway. But then there are also these conversations that are really they're profound and they're very, very serious. I mean, you had a conversation with the owner of the bowling alley that was the center of this mass shooting in Lewiston, Maine. You spoke with a woman who discussed her. She was marginalized due to her ethnicity. I believe she was in Concord, New Hampshire. And then a young woman told a very kind of vulnerable and revealing story about getting married young and having to leave a bad marriage and wanting to escape New England, only to come back and be able to begin to form a community and an identity. As you are putting your stories together, as you are planning your podcast, are you conscious of how you want to kind of sprinkle different story types so that people don't think Seacoast Stories is just, I'm not an entrepreneur, so I have nothing to gain from listening, mm-hmm. or I'm not into self-help, so I have nothing to gain from listening? It does really seem like, whether on a conscious level or a subconscious level, you are aware of the possibility in terms of how wide a net you can cast to tell those stories, as I said, that are both particular to the Seacoast, but also have a universal relevance.
Yeah. So the way I go about choosing who I want to feature, there's a bunch of different things that go into it. Playing to the geography of it, whatever the Seacoast is, I want to try to talk to people from all of those areas. Portsmouth is my base. That's where I live, and that's where a lot of my listeners live. But I want to get to Dover, New Hampshire, to York, Maine, to Ogunquit. York and Ogunquit are places that people vacation all the time. And the Nubble Lighthouse, I interviewed the keeper for the Nubble Lighthouse. Like, that means a lot to people. And so I like to highlight those kinds of stories as well. So geographically, I like to diversify. Industries, I like to diversify. And also, when I have I have an episode coming out soon with a woman who owns a hair salon. I don't care about hair salons. I'm a guy. I've never stepped foot in a hair salon, just a barbershop. I know nothing about dyeing and coloring and blowouts and all the stuff that women do to their hair. So we didn't talk about that. We spent 5 minutes talking about that. That's just like the in to maybe get some of her audience who loves her salon. We instead spent 45 minutes of the conversation talking about how she found her real dad at age 40 after thinking that she had met him at age 6 and 22, not realizing until age 40 that she had met her real dad. These are tear-jerking moments. These are universal human experiences that have nothing to do with a hair salon. So I'm pretty diligent with my research in terms of, not saying no to something on the surface, because I get pitched a lot, like getting pitched by someone who walks dogs for a living. Like, I never had a dog. I never had an animal. I'm sorry. So my gut reaction is like, no, not interested. But then
a dog that owns a hair salon.
Yeah. But then I dig a little bit deeper, maybe through some internet stalking, and realize like, oh, like this person lived a completely different life before this. Right. So always a good lesson to not judge a book by its cover. But I like to try to hit different areas, different subject matter, but then also personally, because that matters most. What do I care the most about? Entrepreneurship, personal development, health and wellness, spirituality, the arts, content, media, entertainment. I gravitate towards all of that stuff. So a couple of things that go into how I source my guests.
Yeah, and I have zero data or scientific evidence to back up what I'm about to say, but I have long felt that there is something about coasts and the seacoast, and particularly the New England seacoast, or really any seacoast, where you've got great variation of climate. Climate is going to really dictate a lot of what you can and can't do on a particular day. You've got 4 seasons or at least 3 that vary greatly, and there's almost a romanticism.
Yeah.
And when you think about the types of people that are drawn to those places. As I said earlier, when you talk about the settling of New England and whatnot, you had religious outcasts, you had a lot of outcasts, places, people who said they either didn't fit in somewhere else, and so they're going to this new place. And then, you think about a place like, say, like Provincetown, Massachusetts, say back in the 1920s, where a lot of the most famous playwrights and like weirdo artists, what led them to Provincetown? Like the painters would talk about that light that just could not be captured anywhere else. But that kind of ethos travels all the way up the coast. And I often feel, whether people are aware of it or not, the character of the place, which is the culmination of all those qualities, the climate and the topography and the geography, it's like this siren song to the people to come and, try to put their foot down here. One of your episodes that I found to be really engaging and maybe the most illustrative of what life on the seacoast is about was a story of the women who were trying to stop and did stop Aristotle Onassis, wanting to build a $600 million oil refinery in Durham, New Hampshire, which I believe at the time would have made it the largest oil refinery in the entire country. And the reason that I found that to be such a ripe story is because it presented all of these kind of evergreen topics that I think are particularly relevant on the seacoast. Now, one of the dictums in real estate is location, 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 right? And God's not making any more seacoasts. So property in and around and near seacoasts will always be at a premium, right? So the Onassis story combines all of these elements. I'm sure there were people that said, well, I don't know, it might destroy some of the environment, but think of the money. Think of the jobs, think of the tax revenue. And then, of course, there were the people these women who were like, are you insane? Did you understand the unintended consequences of this? That in particular really resonated with me. And I feel like you could tell a variation of that story, through so many other anecdotes.
Yeah, that was such a special story and such an unexpected one. And that's been a running theme on the podcast and just as I mingle about town. There's so many things that happen here that are actually like massive deals, but kind of fly under the radar. There's a lot of people in Portsmouth who are very important people globally, and they choose to live here, and no one really knows that they are. There's a guy in the West End of Portsmouth who just opened a bagel shop. This bagel shop is all the rage right now. It's like New York City bagel style. And our paths actually crossed in the past because he built some type of tech company that he sold to Spotify early on in like 2010 for hundreds of millions of dollars. He has an island in Maine, and he now owns a New York City bagel shop in the West End of Portsmouth. Like, there's so many weird stories like that going on. And to your point about the Onassis thing, very few people know that happened. There was this book about it that was written, maybe five-ish years ago by a professor at the University of New Hampshire telling this story. And it's just the craziest story. Why the heck would the world's richest man, a Greek shipping magnate by the name of Aristotle Onassis, who was married to JFK's widow, Jackie Kennedy, identify Durham, New Hampshire as the place where he was going to make his next million? Like, it's crazy. But there's so many fun stories like that people just don't know about. And so part of my job, what makes it fun is also like I tell these very modern day these stories with like salon owners, but also there's so much history here. Let's bring some of that to the surface, which my history major heart makes me very happy.
Exactly. And it also illustrates kind of that almost like timeless tension between, those who want to preserve what's unique about a region that drew people to it together, and those that simply want to, squeeze every drop from the lemon. And when they're done squeezing that lemon, they look around and they're like, oh, we ruined the place that we once loved so much.
Right. And it's such a modern day conversation, right? I mean, what drew me to history in the first place is just like Plato and Aristotle were dealing with the same exact things that we deal with today within our brains. And so like 1972, that story of people banding together to protest environment, we do that every other day today. Like, that's a very common thing. So that's why I love studying history. And, it's you learn so many things from it, and you realize that like humans, we're all the same. We all think that like we're different and no one gets us, but we are all one. We are all cut from the same cloth going back millennia.
Yeah. And, one of the qualities of your podcast that I really like too is, as you said, and as we've discussed, you speak with a lot of entrepreneurs, but your podcast is not just an infomercial.
No.
Various entrepreneurs, because you also talk about some of the very real challenges that entrepreneurs face, but entrepreneurs in particular who are trying to build a business in a place that has a very high cost of living relative to other places. There, it's sought after for a reason, and there's add-on costs because of that. And you've had several shows around what the heck is how come businesses can't stay open that establish in, say, like a downtown Portsmouth. And for those who aren't familiar with Portsmouth, it's, think of a kind of an idyllic seaside community that actually has, working businesses, and that's what Portsmouth is. It has a naval yard, and it has tech and finance centers also. And then you actually, you talk to people who are entrepreneurs, but the biggest struggle in their life is figuring out a place they can afford to live.
Yeah.
So kudos for not skirting that issue.
Yeah. It's so hard to do business here. I just interviewed the assistant mayor of Portsmouth, Joanna Kelly, at a live podcast I hosted a few weeks ago. Oh, were you there? Oh, that's right. You were there. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And so you remember her saying that, there's so many complaints about downtown Portsmouth and how much it's changed. And it's like, oh, like you should put this, this dance thing in downtown. You should put X and you should put Y. And so then we do, speaking for Joe, and then you don't come. So you say you want all of these things, and then you don't come patronize them. You coming once a year doesn't justify its existence. So that's been a running theme on this podcast, and something I will, personally, as a member of the Portsmouth Chamber of Commerce as well, will continue to explore, because like I said, this town is we love supporting local. We love the local businesses, and it breaks our hearts when we see our neighbors having to close down the stores of their dreams. And so that's something a topic I'm fascinated by and will continue to discuss.
So that live event that you just mentioned took place back on June 19th, I think it was, at a wonderful location called the Word Barn.
Yeah.
So we're in southern New England. Get yourself over to the Word Barn to hear great singer-songwriter musical acts and some spoken word stuff, and the occasional live podcast too. But it was a beautiful Thursday night. We were out in a meadow, sold out. And what I found really interesting about that event was the age range, the diversity of age ranges represented, not just in the audience, but also on the stage. You had one entrepreneur who was a guy in his late 50s. You had several young women who I'm going to guess were 20s, 30s or whatnot. And I don't know the population of the audience in terms of who was there because they knew someone who was talking, or who was there because they were a big fan of you and the show. But they didn't do what you just spoke of. They didn't listen to the podcast and say, oh, that sounds like a great idea, but I'm not going. Yeah. They got out of their house on a Thursday night and they went out to just listen to people talk.
Yeah.
Talk about Exhibit A in terms of evidence that connection and community and conversation is hugely powerful.
Oh my God, absolutely. There is such a craving in this age of content. We're paralyzed by the amount of content we have available to us, the amount of options, with AI becoming by the day, infringing upon what is real and what is natural and what is authentic. And me every day having to think about, like, is this email? Is this text? Is this DM? Like, is this legit? Is this you, or is this some AI that you've trained to say this? I don't know. And so in this world of inauthenticity and virtual stuff, there is such a desire to connect in person, in real life. No amount of technological advancement can ever replace that. This is what we are wired for in our DNA, in our brains. Since the dawn of time, we are wired to love and support and protect those in our immediate vicinity. And so me knowing this and me growing tired of the virtual online work through the past few years, have been very intentional about, I don't want this just to be another piece of content that is available on the internet. I want it to be that, yes, but I want it to be a gateway for real in-person connection at live podcasts, at the monthly dinners that I'm doing with my audience, at the dating show that I'm hosting in September. That's what I'm obsessed with. I'm obsessed with getting people together to hear stories, to break down the walls, to relate to the universal truths, and to realize that we are all in this thing together.
Yeah, and well, what I'm about to say might sound like a pitch. It isn't a pitch necessarily, but take it for what you will. But to illustrate exactly what you're talking about, I'll take a moment to point to my own brother, Rob Azevedo, has a place called Pembroke City Limits in Pembroke, New Hampshire, and they've been open for almost a year. Troy, you got to check it out. It is the epitome of everything you're talking about. It's my brother Rob Azevedo has had a radio show for, I'm going to say 10 or 12 years out of Manchester every Friday night called Granite State of Mind. But then he wanted to open a live performance venue. And the musicianship is top rate week in and week out. They're open Tuesdays to Sundays. But the most important thing that he and his partner have created is this community. You walk into that place on a Thursday, on a Friday, on a Saturday, on their Sunday brunch. It's filled with people of all ages. people of, sort of all viewpoints. And that community is there, and the joy is palpable. The enthusiasm is palpable. And I don't think he even set out to say, I want to create a place that does this, this, and that. He just knew he had a love of music and of people. And it's almost, it's Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yes.
If you built it, the people have come. I recommend that you check it out. It's in Pembroke, New Hampshire, as I said. And similarly, with Seacoast Stories, you have built it. The people have come. The people are listening. So I think that did you just wrap up season 1, season 2?
Yeah, just wrapped up season 2, just launched season 3. The live show was the official kickoff.
Okay. What do listeners have to look forward to in terms of podcast episodes? And you did mention a couple of other live events, but what happens in more live events?
Yeah, so episodes will continue to be in the same vein of what we've talked about. A lot of entrepreneurs. I will look to expand geographically a little more. So I'm talking to someone from Newburyport soon. I'm talking to someone from Portland, Maine soon. So trying to expand the borders of Seacoast Stories a little bit to try to reach more audience. I'm interviewing some people who are a little bit more known, like Seacoast famous. They might have very large followings. I just posted an episode with someone who has 120,000 followers on Instagram, Aaron Holt. So I'm going to talk to some like more notable people. And then expect, from a production standpoint, going to have more video. I hear the industry screaming at me, video. I just hadn't done it yet because it's such a lift production wise, but now I have more time in my hands without being at the Ringer. So I'm going to have some more video episodes to watch on the Seacoast Stories YouTube channel. I'm beefing up my social media stuff beyond just podcast clips, and more so I'm attending lots of local events and interviewing the people on site that like you might see at on the news. Like tomorrow I'm going to the opening day of a new bagel and sandwich shop in Kittery, Maine. And so I'm just going to go do a social media exclusive interview, like the kind of package that you would have seen on the news back in the day. I'm now going to bring that to social media. So all that stuff is happening. In July, we are hosting our first official Seacoast Stories dinner club. I'm partnering with some friends who have been on the show, Ray and Ryan Lambert, to creatively, I can't say too much about it now, but to creatively get strangers together to enjoy dinner together in various restaurants across the Seacoast. So more events, more content showing up in different places, but at the heart of it, really good stories that move and inspire people and bring us all closer together.
Well, we will be listening, and when possible, we will be attending. So my guest has been Troy Farkas. He is the host, the producer, the engineer, I know I'm missing a bunch of stuff.
The guest booker, the salesperson, the promoter.
Vacuums the green room.
Do it all. I love it.
Yes, he's Mr. Everything when it comes to Seacoast Stories. Check out the podcast. Doesn't matter whether you're on the Seacoast. The Seacoast is a state of mind, and you have tapped into it. Thank you for your time, sir.
I'm putting that on a shirt. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it.